Welcome back to Air Quality Matters. And I believe we already have the tools and knowledge we need to make a difference to the quality of the air we breathe in our built environment. The conversations we have and how we share what we know is the key to our success. I'm Simon Jones, and coming up, a conversation with David Pierpoint, CEO and founder of the Retrofit Academy. Skills and training, it seems, is a universal challenge in the built environment, and none more so than in retrofit, a sector that requires a diverse range of skills and experience and knowledge to deliver the outcomes we desire. I've known David for what I think now is coming up to 15 years, and you won't find a more passionate and knowledgeable person in the sector about driving skills and training around retrofit. In the Retrofit Academy, I believe he's created a top-drawer organisation, and as he puts it, driven to deliver the very best training they can day to day. So as we look to improve ventilation and air quality in the built environment, I think there's a lot we can learn from David and the experience they've had developing skills and training in the retrofit sector. I'm recording live from the Future Build conference this week, where in fact the Retrofit Academy, as it does every year, is hosting the Retrofit conference as part of Future Build. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Don't forget to check out the sponsors in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net. This is a conversation with David Pierpoint. I think it's fair to say retrofit has had its challenges, right? Whether it's quality or skills and training, because it's such a broad mix of things that you need to get retrofit right. Labour, actually getting people, getting people interested in that sector. What's fascinating to me about retrofit sector from your perspective is I see such analogies with ventilation and where it's at, particularly perhaps maybe even 10 or 15, 20 years ago, where we don't really know the words, but the sector, there isn't a trade for it. You don't go to college to learn to be a ventilation person. It falls somewhere between trades. Nobody really understands the language. Every time we look at it, and I mean every time we look at it, we see wholesale failures to even get close to minimum standards. Real people are being affected by poor outcomes. Yep. And you've been in this space for how long now?
15 or so years.
Yeah.
I lose count.
Something must have triggered with you back 15 years ago that made you think you could bring something to the table here to pull this together. I'm guessing you must have seen something similar in it, that there was this disparate group of trades and skills challenges and labour challenges. There's something there, was there?
Yeah, right. So I was more than 15 years ago. I was an events organizer. It's like the show we're at here, big built environment shows, and this is interesting actually. Retrofit was one of the coming themes 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's why it came to my attention. It was an opportunity, an area that we could develop in a show or a conference program. And in fact, I organised the UK's first Retrofit Expo in 2012, I think it was.
Really?
So wow. That don't get me wrong. As an individual, I had two real interests. One, it was always been the desire to do something with life that's going to lead to a positive legacy, if you like, at some point. I mean, I couldn't be I just couldn't do something that I didn't feel had a positive impact on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get out of bed every morning. And the other interest I had was around skills and people. And I was on a board of a national skills academy, which was looking at environmental technology. So that was an interest. And actually retrofit does, it was such a broad challenge and such a blank canvas. As you say, it has all these different facets and aspects, and someone needs to do something about these things. And back in those days, of course, we had this thing called the Green Deal. It was,
of course.
the coalition government's next big thing. And we thought it was going to get big quick. And it's a number I hate. I can't wait for never to have to use it again. It's 27 million homes. 27 million homes to be retrofitted, because I remember the very first time I ever saw that number presented, it was actually the conference session at Eco Build, I think it was back in those days. Must have been in 2008-9, and it was a classic. How many times have we used this phrase? 27 million homes to retrofit in X years, and at that time it would have been close to 40 years, I guess. And now it's still 27 million homes, but it's 25 years.
Yeah.
So it's the scale of the challenge is what is attractive to people like me who like to fiddle with things and try and make things better.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's somebody in a government department sitting there somewhere, doing a back of a fag packet calculation saying, right, got to reduce carbon emissions by X. This is our existing stock. Right, if we do this to half of it, that will get us to where it ends. So you come up with these big numbers, and the UK is not alone in that. Most European countries at some point in the last 15 or 20 years have come up with ridiculous numbers of retrofit, and largely we're still looking back. And manipulate's probably an unfair word, but certainly what you find is big numbers of homes get hit, but we found all of a sudden it was single measures and that's not retrofit.
It sounds like fair, and we're still doing way too much of that stuff.
Yeah.
Way too much. And annoyingly, a lot of those programs are now called retrofit programs, and they're not.
Yeah.
So, have we spent money wisely? To be fair, I was thinking about this earlier, but the government's invested an awful lot of money into this sector. And it might get criticised for it not being enough. And I'm talking about blue governments as well as red governments, because certainly when I started, it was a red government, then it's to blue and yellow, and now it's red again. But they've all pretty consistently invested. Whether they've invested in the right things, probably not. And certainly measures-based programs are. I mean, how many measures lists have we seen over the years where ventilation, which you want to talk to me about, isn't included?
Yeah.
How can you have a retrofit program that doesn't ventilate hillbillies? It's crazy, right?
Yeah, and I don't know, I suppose at some level, it's a safe bet if you're a government, because while you do invest a lot of money into it, it generates jobs or revenue or products, regardless of how successful technically it is, it has an economic impact to some degree, doesn't it?
It has a potential to be a massive economic benefit, but it generally isn't.
Yeah.
And it's because the money is invested mainly into sectors which have very short-term thinking, short-term business plans, if they have a business plan at all. And the opportunity is maximize the government funding, get as much as you can, play the system, and then, close down before it's too late.
Yeah, the proverbial hits the fan.
Yeah, and that is not a sector we should be investing in. And it's all too clear to see. It's been all too clear to see lately. I'm sure we'll come on to some of those things. Whereas when you invest in doing, if you kind of call it whole house retrofit or quality retrofit and scale, and you're working with actors who are committed to seeing it through, whether they're social landlords or contractors, consultants, local authorities, that's eminently investable. But we haven't historically put enough money into that sector. We are just about to see the first, huge, eye-watering sum, if you like, for a long time, £1.2 billion into the Warm Homes Programme. There's a lot of money. With the match that comes from landlords, it's even more money. And that is an opportunity we can't waste. We can't throw that away on doing more. Frankly, swear on your podcast.
Of course you can. Yeah.
You can't throw that money. You can't throw that opportunity away on the crap.
Yeah. And not to do the sector down, and that's not the point of this, but I think it's interesting to see where it's come from. And particularly I'm interested in talking to you about the lessons learned. But we have come a long way. There's no doubt about it. And I think you see that in the kind of money that's been invested in. If you look at what we have now with the likes of the Retrofit Academy and skills and training, it's a country mile from where we were. And we're at the point where financial institutions are betting with it. when it comes to lower rates of loans. And we're seeing that in many jurisdictions around Europe, that there's enough of a confidence in that sector. We can get it to the point where it becomes a safe bet if done right.
Okay.
So, I think, it's good to start from that point. We have actually come quite a long way. But going back to, well, I suppose when I first met you, which was 15 years ago or so, I guess, which was back in core days, we weren't there. And I guess we were just in and around, or just about to start the bond field review and each home counts and that kind of period, weren't
Just
we?
before then, really.
Yeah.
So it was very much that Green Deal. It was the last time our government minister, Greg Barker, bless him, he put his head up the parapet and tried to lead a big, very bold initiative, and that was really exciting. But the problem with the Green Deal, and the government realised it within a couple of years, irrespective of all the interest rates and the reasons that people didn't take it up. I mean, it's a relief with hindsight that it wasn't taken up more widely, because the quality of the work that would have been carried out under that program would have been far too low, and we'd have been industrializing a lot of bad practice. What didn't exist, and only exists to an extent now, is good practice.
Yeah.
Right. So, you think about all the stuff we've done over the years, all this, you've been involved in, I've been involved in. There's been an awful lot around, let's get more funding into the sector, or let's get people skilled up. And that's important. Obviously that's important. But until those people are doing the right things in the right order, we don't get good outcomes. And we've done enough retrofit or energy efficiency or whatever we want to call it to know it's better not to do it at all than to do it badly.
And I'm thinking back to those conferences from the core days, the Centre of Refurbishment Excellence, I think it was. And it was, the point of that, I suppose, was that there were people that knew what good looked like, right? And knew how this jigsaw piece fitted together. Bearing in mind, this was before PAS, this was before bond field review. There were people forging a path that could get good outcomes in. I remember some of the presentations of some of the, the London historical buildings and so on, like complex retrofit projects that people knew how to do. A small scale. And so that's what's interesting for me, is that when we look at it from a ventilation perspective, I look out into the world at the ventilation, it feels to me a bit like back then, that there are people that know how to do this at small scale.
Yeah.
It's being done at big scale quite poorly. And we know that every time we look at it, we unearth the poor outcomes. So we've kind of got to get from this point of champions, pioneers that know how to stitch this stuff together holistically, to a point where we're building up scale. And that's an interesting journey, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's what my organisations are best known for. It's not all we do now, but it's what we're best known for, is training retrofit coordinators. And the course we put together for them, started it back in the core days, we take it on a whole different level now, was very much about taking all that knowledge in the heads of those people that you're talking about, people who had been doing it at small scale, and turning that into the course that would create mini me's, mini thems.
They were your Peter Rickabys and your Neil Mays and those kind of characters, I suppose.
Well, certainly Peter. Neil wasn't particularly involved, God bless, God rest him, but lots of it, Bob Pruitt, Mark Elton, or John Willoughby. You're bringing back some memories here. Some of these people I hadn't seen in many years. But yeah, I mean, they have a huge amount of knowledge. But in reality, and Peter, we still work very closely with Peter and Colin King and a number of others now.
Colin, of course, yeah.
Yeah, that they'd not done it at scale. Okay, so writing the textbook to deliver high quality one-off deep retrofit is completely different from the manual to do that across 1,000 properties in 18 months.
Yeah.
And that's so it's not just that practice aren't established. So good practice isn't embedded in what everybody does yet. It's actually that most of it hasn't been worked out yet, or hasn't been done before. So that has been, if you like, that's the drum I've been banging for most of the last 15 years. And that's mainly what the Academy does. It tries to give people the opportunity to learn from all those people who have done it before, but also work together and collaboratively with, just launched a trade association, which is very much focused on practice, to figure out the shared learning so that everyone can do this better, because we've got to do it better.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Neil May saying when he was writing the white paper around moisture risk in buildings, so that I can't remember if it was in it or it was just a conversation. Time blurs things, but he was describing how when you're writing something to describe best practice, the reality is you're never going to face all of the examples that are likely to be faced out there. But what you've got to be able to do is create a toolkit for people, a resource that they know how to reference and get to when they come across a junction they've not seen before, come across a wall build-up that's unusual. That's the skill in the challenge. It isn't about covering all the bases. It's about creating mechanisms for people to be able to reach in and get to the right decision. And if you're scaling, I guess that's incredibly important, because you're never going to have 10,000 Peter Rickbys out there micromanaging a retrofit project. That you've got to create a structure that enables people to know how to manage that risk in some way.
It's you started off talking about the construction industry, the built environment sector, and it is famously, they're not my words, they're words other people use that over the last 25 years in the sector I picked up, conservative, cautious, doesn't embrace technology. Whatever. I know there are examples, but the sector does. But it's 2025, and answers to problems are in your phone. They're on YouTube. You can get them off ChatGPT.
It's not locked into decades of apprenticeship work. I think someone was describing this to me the other day with the construction sector, that the construction sector is a sector that's moved in decades, if not half centuries, generally, technically. It's moved with subtle changes in the environment or new building products or ways of working. And that tended to occur in 20, 30 years. If you kind of look back at how our buildings evolved over the last couple of centuries, that seems to be the way it is. But you look at the construction sector now, and it's almost every 3 to 5 years, the sector's moving so fast with new materials, new understanding, that it's quite a burden on that sector. But as you say, we have access to information in a way that we never had before. Those skills would have only ever been learned by serving your time in an organisation, and you learn by what you saw, maybe from a few books.
I suppose what I'm trying to say, I'm clearly not saying it very well, is it's perfectly possible to get a huge amount of information across to a large number of people in this age.
Yeah.
If you can marry genuine technical good practice with ways of communicating and ways of sharing it. And that's what we're trying to do. When you talk about core, we had no assets. I had a building that was wonderful and I miss it, but, it wasn't particularly an asset to what we were actually trying to do, which was, I think the retrofit was build an army of competent retrofitters, compare and contrast that to now. And a lot's changed technologically in that time as well, in terms of what you can do with digital education. I'm sitting here with you in your film studio. You couldn't have done this 15 years.
No.
In terms of apps, God, I would have been terrified if someone had said we should build a Retrofit Academy app probably 5 years ago now. And it's now just what you do. It's perfectly possible to do it. And yet, we trained 8,000 people to some extent. And I think the single biggest learning we've had in doing that is that stopping and starting doesn't work, right? Those people, and there's good ones and bad ones, right? But those people are the ones who want to do it properly, do not need to stop learning. They never need to stop learning. They're on a lifelong learning journey. And most of what they need to learn actually isn't, with respect to Peter. There is a limit to what's in his head. There's a lot in his head, but there are limits. It's what we don't know yet. Yeah, so it's all the stuff you've got your first social hazard decarbonisation fund programs just coming to an end, just winding down. There's been a lot of good retrofit done. You'll see at our awards tomorrow night. There's been a lot of good retrofit done. let's find out how that was done, and let's figure out what worked and what didn't from those things, and then let's get all that information across, so to all these people.
Yes.
It's the only way that it's perfectly possible to do it.
As it started with you to some degree, that there was a sense that there was some kind of technical coordination role need. Was the idea of a retrofit coordinator there before the PAS kind of structured it to some degree? You were kind of thinking somebody needs a kind of a, what was it in your head at the time, like a project management type role?
It didn't come from my head. I can't take credit for that. There was the chap widely accredited as coming up with the term retrofit coordinator, a bloke called Robert Pruitt, who's one of the UK's leading retrofit architects and a very good friend. He was working with Peter Rickaby on writing some guides that came out, something called the Retrofit for the Future program. Do you remember that? So that was...
Know the name, I can't so recall it,
turn of the last decade, turn of the 2010s. Basically, it was a challenge to see how low you could get the energy, residual, the heat demand and all that sort of stuff from deep retrofits funded by what was then in Technology Strategy Board. And one of the learnings that they took away from the program, Bob was leading one of those, I think then Peter led some, was that you really need one person in charge of a project that knows everything that's going on. So very much project management. And Bob laid that role out in one of his guides. You can still find it. I think it's on our website, somewhere, his guide. And designed a role that he played that role effectively. He's from an architectural background, not much he doesn't know about doing it. So it was sort of, when we first came up with it, and then Bob brought it, and there were a few others who said, let's get hold of that and turn it into something. And the idea was very much that we'd be training other architects, building surveyors, construction professionals to diversify into retrofit. Take on that role. The reality has been a little different than
that. And it's turned into, I guess because of the way that these things are standardized, a bit of a risk management role as well. The risk plays very heavily in a lot of how it's structured. Was there some of that back then as well? This kind of managing risk, seeing retrofit through the risk lens, I suppose.
It's called the course, Retrofit Coordination and Risk Management.
Oh, okay.
So from day one, because the risks that, people are talking about right now, as if they're learning it for the first time, are exactly the same. They're just at larger scale now. So risk management is crucial. But really, the driver was, and it's absolutely right, unless you've got somebody, an individual, who knows what they're doing, in charge of a project, and has got the homeowners back or the landlords back, and their driver is not, the value engineering or the protecting the margin or specifying a particular product. It just does not work unless you have that independent, knowledgeable person. Yeah, and that's what the PAS did. It really took on the structure of the role that we'd worked up. And there's a clause in the PAS which says their job is to protect the interests of the homeowner or the landlord.
And I think that's a really often missed point of the retrofit coordinator, is that advocacy role, that your job is the advocate for the tenant or for the homeowner or for the landlord. It's
even more than that. It's to protect their interests. It's to ensure that they get what they're spending their money on, even if it's free money from the government. Because look, there are recent example of, it's been in the news, many people will have seen it, an external wall insulation project in Luton that has failed to a catastrophic level, led to an individual family living in an appalling situation for far too long with not enough support provided to get it right. And they're exactly the same risks. And retrofit coordinators are involved in that. That's people not doing their job properly. If they were doing their job properly, they would not allow things like that to happen. Yeah. And they're not managing those risks.
How do we get there? Like, how do we get to the point where we have these large-scale poor outcomes? Is it just a failure of accountability and responsibility, do you think? Because we should know enough not to get there at this stage, shouldn't we?
Well,
really?
At this point in time, those issues are believed to be fairly prevalent in what you might call the eco sector, the energy company obligation sector, and the GBIS sector, which are really the sectors in which they're quite installer-led and they're quite measures-based. So they're not by design meant to be that. In reality, they probably are. This is the world that gave us a lot of loft insulation, a lot of cavity fills, a lot of boiler replacements, that kind of thing. So fuel poverty schemes, fuel barriers, and trying to change that sector by saying, well, we've got a standard now which says you have to do it differently. So if you like, you're retrofitting an entire sector that's harder than starting from scratch with a new sector. We say, well, this doesn't exist yet. We're going to invest in building up a whole new set of companies, whole new set of skills, whole new set of people. No, and don't think around, that's hard too. But I don't think it's as hard as trying to change the culture and change the outlook of an entire sector and thousands of people who've been working in it for years, decades, doing things, the way they think they should do.
And the built environment, whether we like it or not, progresses often through a series of single measures. I hate to use the word, but a series of processes often. There is retrofit, holistic retrofit, deep retrofit. There's a whole number of terms depending on which part of Europe you're in. But that idea that you have a goal for a building and holistically you move it from A to B and you have a coordinator who's responsible for that. The reality is that the vast majority of the built environment is having incremental improvements the whole time from a whole range of different angles, whether it's maintenance, reactive maintenance, planned maintenance, renovation as opposed to retrofit. There can be a number of different ways buildings progress. And I think that the challenge has always been in that sector where you have companies that specialize in one thing. Scale is the game, and they just want to bash out cavity insulation or loft insulation or solar panels or whatever perhaps the market is driving at the time. Often as well, there's usually a market force behind a lot of this momentum, isn't there?
Yeah, it's not too complicated. There are lots of factors which lead to those outcomes.
Yeah,
partly people not doing their job properly. It's partly value engineering. It's partly the design of the funding schemes in the first place. And it's partly about policing, because in a sector that's got a bad track record, let's face it, parts of our sector, mentioned the Bonfield Review and each of them counts, we know it's got troubled history. And that's why the policing's so important, and it's not been good enough.
Yeah.
It's not been anywhere near good enough. Neither has the consumer redress. I remember when PAS came out, I remember writing a slide and saying the best thing about PAS 2035 and each home counts means that no one is going to be left hanging again. Whatever the problem, that this system is going to get put right, and it hasn't been. There are I very much hope that the problems aren't as widespread as I fear they might be.
And it's part of that. I remember talking to somebody back a while ago about some of these policing and consumer protection mechanisms. In the UK, we have, for listeners that are outside the UK, things like Trustmark, which was an organisation whose, as a result of each home counts, effectively is the body that provides the consumer protection and some of the policies that these big organisations, insulation organisations, ventilation organisations, the component parts of the industry, I suppose. But it was an existing organisation that happened to be a vehicle at the time. I wonder if you were writing it from scratch, would the policing mechanism look like a Trustmark if you could do it over again, or you didn't have it there as a vehicle ready to go? Can it ever provide the kind of policing that's needed to really protect consumers? That's the question.
So my personal view on that would be, I think they've done their absolute best in almost impossible circumstances.
Yeah.
They did lack technical expertise, and they've always been resource constrained.
Yeah.
The only way, in my view, that this can be done properly is for a properly funded government agency, because
That looks like building control or something else, do you think?
I don't think it is building control. But it's similar.
Yeah.
It's regulated. It's independent of all interests other than the government's priorities. Because the problem with Trustmark have had is they had a limited amount of funding, and then their business plan, as I understand it today, was very much it's the volume of lodgements that going to generate income for the organisation, which is going to allow you to employ more people, and so you've got a bit of a paradox there. You've got an organisation there whose job it is to ensure quality outcomes, being funded, if you like, by volume.
Yeah,
that is a difficult position to manage.
And their only stick is with the umbrella organisations that manage those particular trades. So they're one step removed from policing to some degree. Their ability to enforce is only really on the organisations that are members of Trustmark, not on the individuals that are conducting the work. And I think that perhaps is one of the greater challenges, is that you can't respond directly to a complaint in the same way if you can't talk and redress exactly with those particular trades. That's a challenge.
That was a theme of the recent Department for Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee that was looking at the Luton programme. And so, you've got, I think Trustmark would have liked to have able to, finding out for them is quite difficult because they're one step removed from that. And then acting is quite difficult because that has to be, for the various complicated reasons that went above my head somewhat, has to be done by certain organisations in a certain way. But when you're the homeowner with the mushrooms growing on the wall, I don't think you care less about any of that.
Yeah.
So, as I think you mentioned earlier to me that you're going to be interviewing a few other people this week, and some of those people work for some of those schemes, if you like, they're in the middle.
Yeah.
Between Trustmark and consumers. You should ask them. I mean, from my perspective, I've been singularly unimpressed by those accreditation schemes, those guarantee agencies. Almost, there are exceptions, but not many.
Well, I mean, I can speak from personal experience on the ventilation side of stuff. People do a competency course for ventilation. It's 2 days long. I went and did one out of interest one day. Half a dozen of the people that turned up were smoking pot for most of the day and were just there for a day out. It's designed to pass. And so in no way could you possibly describe anybody leaving that 2-day course as competent to any stretch. And then you're never policed again after that moment. Like from that moment onwards, unless your organisation, in the case of, I think, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, under NIC, which is one of the electrical trade bodies, they do have an internal policing kind of auditing process, but that tends to only happen on the electrical side of those organisations, not on the ventilation. So in theory, the entire ventilation skill set that's within that umbrella of Trustmark is out in the wild, never to be looked at again. And that was the question I was going to ask you. Is there any mechanism in the UK as it stands today where a third party anybody is going to turn up at a retrofit job and have a look at what's going on?
Well, they are now, because a complaint of, I think, they said that every EWI project that was delivered under ECO or G-bins needs to go and be visited and audited. But that's closing the stable door after bolting. And the audit, now, I'm not an expert in this area, but I believe the typical audit rate was 2%, or thereabouts. And presumably those 2% were showing up issues. I remember very clearly in 2013, Ofgem published figures which said that let me get this right, 13% of all external wall insulation projects had type A fails. That was presumably under eco back in those days. It might have been CERT, CES. 13% where things lead to dangerous outcomes, either things falling off from hitting people on the head potentially, or sort of mushrooms growing out of the wall type stuff. 13%. And then we put an audit regime which said, well, let's just take a look at a couple of percent. So no is your answer. And you speak to Colin King about this, when he was the whistleblower essentially on board practice last decade. He was saying exactly the same then. There's no such thing as a proper site audit. However, and this is the key thing, right? There is a whole sector doing this properly.
And I was going to ask you that, right? What separates the organisations that are going to be celebrated this week at the Retrofit Academy Awards from those clusterfucks that we see out in the industry? Yes, you can swear on this podcast. Those, quite frankly, clusterfucks and everything in between. What do you think manifestly separates those from the people that are going to be rightly celebrated?
Just one word. It's professionalism. They go about things in a professional way. Standards, they're great, aren't they? The companies we work with, whether they're architectural practices or surveyors or tier ones, tier twos, they don't need a standard to tell them how to do things properly. They've been doing things properly for decades. That's a minimum. A standard is a minimum. And yet you've got another sector, and we spend too long today talking about the cowboys, frankly.
Yeah.
But, there's another sector for whom, they would look at that and they would laugh at it and think, no, never going. And the fag packet approach prevails. They may, annoyingly, and this is where Trustmark had an opportunity to gather data, to be a data warehouse, which there is. That was an opportunity for all projects to be logged. And for the first time ever, there would be visibility on data, which will be telling us how things were working, what was working, where the failure points, what are the trends, what are the patterns. And I hear that we're going to find out more about this week, which is good news, but it's been taking far too long.
Yeah, and under PAS, there was certainly under Pathway B and C, there's a degree of monitoring as well, or was, for certain complexities. Will we see that data, do you think, effectively, the actual outcomes?
Well, you feel from a sector that's done it properly.
Yeah.
And if you bear in mind, those contractors are working in communities with a social landlord or a local authority as partner who wants to know that the money that's been spent has brought the outcomes, because look, they're quite good at procuring those sorts of things. And there will be very widespread resident engagement and resident feedback and evaluation. And snags and defects will be, I'm sure there are flies in the ointment, but generally speaking, they'll be put right.
Yeah.
Whereas, what you call about evaluation there in the eco sector, we really had to push very hard to get like a basic survey being mandatory. And you can bet your bottom dollar, and this is the world of lead generation and all that sort of stuff. You can bet your bottom dollar the evaluation is a fill in that form, and it's not at all how PAS was designed.
And that's the problem we have across the built environment. Is it's one of the few manufacturing processes that doesn't have a great deal of feedback loops. We tend to send our product off into the wild without really much feedback about performance and expectations and delights and all of the things that, if you were manufacturing cars or almost anything else, you were going to be all over. But somehow we're not there in.
I keep stressing, they keep doing it. There is a sector that's doing all of that stuff, and they're doing it really well.
Yeah.
So come to the show. You can go to the conference. You can visit the exhibitors. You can. We've got our new, as mentioned earlier, our trade association, the Association of Retrofit Consultants. Now, these are people who deliver fantastic programs, fantastic outcomes, all the time.
I'll have you back in just a minute. I just want to borrow you briefly to talk to you about 21 Degrees, a partner of the podcast. Formerly the Green Building Store, They were founded in 1995 by 3 exceptional building professionals, and the company grew out of their frustration with the poor availability of ecological building products. And I've known them for years as the go-to company in the UK for end-to-end design-led MVHR systems. You see, your home should do far more than just provide shelter and be energy efficient. If designed correctly, it'll be a far healthier and more comfortable environment. So whether you just want to start with a single product solution or need a comprehensive range of technologies to make your home more comfortable, 21 Degrees can help. In 21 Degrees, you won't find a more trustworthy, straight-talking, passionate about what they do, and approachable group of people. I speak a lot about the performance gap on this podcast and what we can achieve if we value ventilation highly enough. 21 Degrees embodies that sentiment for me. So if you're building a home, looking to install ventilation, or need to talk to experts in the field, I can't recommend them highly enough. Links are in the show notes at airqualitymatters.net, and you can find them at 21degrees.com. That's 21degrees.com. Now, back to the podcast. Here's a question for you. One of the things that I often had conversation with over the last 10 or 15 years has been the progression of passive house as a standard, right? And one of the accusations I did a talk maybe 10 years ago about what I thought was wrong with passive house. I was one of those, those talks you do where you come along as the contrarian deliberately. But one of the points I was making back then, and there is some truth to it, and that is when you're at a pioneering stage and you've got organizations that deeply care about the product that they're producing, you have this group of people highly dedicated to a good outcome. And you can take that so far at a scale. You can build so far, but at some point, that idea has to find its way into the wild, to the parts of the sector. I'm not saying that don't care, but don't care as much, that are practically just trying to get by day to day, delivering what they're supposed to do. It's not necessarily forced on them, but they find themselves with this approach that they have to deliver to, as opposed to people that have bought into it in their blood, right? And Passive House has struggled with that for years, transitioning from micro scale, where you might have a block of apartments or a small little multi-story or something, to genuine scale. And it looks like now we're just starting to cross that Rubicon. There are larger scale developers that are now going, well, to be frank, we're so close to it now, it only going to take a few tweaks and we're effectively Passive House. Do you think Retrofit could find that challenge, in the sense that at the moment it's still being led by champions? And are you starting to see the others starting to be in the sector and deliver quality outcomes?
I'm not an expert in passive house. That's a way back.
Sure.
An interface there.
But yeah, I think you get what I mean.
I do get what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, again, look at the companies who are delivering what they call retrofit programs or decolonization programs. They're names you've heard of, Mears, Waits, Sustainable Building Services, Equans, Osborne, they are large contracting firms. I don't know who's delivering passive house at scale, if I'm honest, but that there are significant businesses who've seen a significant opportunity and made a significant investment into it. So I'm not sure that the scale thing's as much a problem, actually, as it might be. I say I'm not an expert in new build at all. But the equivalent, of course, Enefits, on the retrofit side, there is moderate take-up of. I mean, the programs we're delivering, even through the better quality schemes in social housing and local government, that stuff aren't delivering to Enefit. I think a fraction, or I don't know what the number would be, but it'd be a tiny percentage.
Yeah.
And there is certainly an issue about a lack of clarity around the standard we should be setting. Part of the reason for that is that we look to the government to set a standard, and they're not the right people to do it. So we've got to figure that out for ourselves. And I don't think the standard that industry comes up with will be approaching Enefit. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is what is the optimum investment into a property that you can make at a given point of time. It is not always going to be do it all, spend the £80,000. For a lot of properties, it's not going to be anything like it or not. We're going to be installing a lot of heat pumps where it's inevitable the heat pump's going to be installed, and we've got to do something about improving the quality of the fabric to the extent that heat pump can be effective. That's not anything like Environ standard stuff, but the danger is that you can make, again, you install a heat pump in a building that's not been improved to the fabric isn't to the whatever the coefficient of performance level that they agree is the right one. Then you're just costing those people more money, and their energy bills are going to go up.
Yeah, interesting.
So I don't believe in top-down standards. I think the industry has got to come together and set that standard, and then provide supply chain and manufacturers with certainty that is the trajectory.
Yeah, and that consistency has always been the big challenge, multi-annual funding, consistency. I mean, consistency is important to everybody, not just consistency of training and what's happening from the government, but everybody's got to back this thing. And so they need to know it's not just here this year and next year, but it's here 5 and 6 years.
And only the government can do that. By the way, that unfortunately that's the government lend the money.
Yeah.
For now.
And of course, we live in a world where over these 5 and 6 year cycles, we have other existential crises that have an impact in that makeup and shape and flavour of retrofit, depending on fuel costs and energy crises. And we've started to learn more about embodied carbon, so that adds a complexity. The sector's evolving as well. So what might work now might be subtly different or quite different in 5 years' time.
Amazing, the rate of change,
isn't it? Just
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you, which I find fascinating, because again, it gets me thinking with my training head on about ventilation, is partly because of the standards, but also out of necessity. We've also seen the development of not only the importance of a retrofit coordinator role, but a retrofit designer, a retrofit assessor. Clearly, there are specialisms within the theme that people bring certain skills to the party to deliver it well. And ventilation is no exception. We see the same here. Someone that may be good on site, project managing, it perhaps has no place being a ventilation designer. That's a particular skill that you need to lean on those people. And likewise, somebody going in and assessing a building may be subtly different in some way. If you could have a well-trained somebody but could only pick one, which one of those three would you prefer to have? A retrofit designer, a retrofit coordinator? Yeah.
Well, I'd rather have a retrofit designer.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't. A retrofit assessor's job is to collect some data and carry out a survey to a decent standard, which we still seem to struggle with, but it is that simple. I think the optimum, it's a bit of a trick answer to your question. The optimum would be a retrofit designer who's also a coordinator. But if money were no object, who would I want? If you're going to spend 50, 60,000 quid on your property of any time, with an extension or, new door or windows, or whatever, you wouldn't think twice about getting an architect. Of course you would. You're not going to, that's just the way it's always been done. And yet when we come to energy efficiency, which is quite complicated, as Brickaby always says, it's not rocket science, but it is challenging.
Yeah.
We think, well, how cheaply can we get this done? And what's the least, we got to, you've got to get to a point. I mean, the other challenge we have, these excellent designers and excellent coordinators that we've got, is making their services affordable to the general public. That's the other side of it. And the companies that provide those services well are too small at the minute and too in demand, and frankly. If you throw out the challenge of the average 12 million, I think we've got owner-occupied homes, it might be more than that. These people aren't going to go very far. So you don't always have the luxury of who you might want. But if I had to choose one at the minute and I was going to spend proper money, I'd absolutely want the designer. It's interesting. We'd learned a lot. We developed a retrofit designer course about 12 months ago. And what we've learned about that individual is their job isn't often to be the architectural drawing-y type person. It's to be the manager of others who are doing design. So with ventilation, generally speaking, the design comes from the systems manufacturer, the manufacturer of the system, and that's right. But joining all those things together, because it's, we're not doing many retrofits where all we're doing is sticking in a extract fan. They're part of a much wider project. So bring all those things together and coordinating them. So I like the designer coordinator role. I think that's definitely, you get to integrate all the design and all the delivery at the same time.
And I have some insight on the ventilation design element of your course because I was involved in it. And it's interesting. I would agree with you. It's that it's not necessarily designing the nuts and bolts. It's knowing enough about it to know what good looks like when it comes across your desk or not, and how it stitches in with the rest of the retrofit. That's the challenge, isn't it? So who are the kind of people that are making good retrofit designers? Are they the architects traditionally, or are you finding a different mix of people that?
I think compare and contrast. There are people training to be a retrofit coordinator who are a domestic energy assessor and have done a 5-day course and previously were nothing to do with buildings, and might become a retrofit assessor, which is, if you do it with the right training organisation, just another couple more days, completely different than ours, I'd say. But they are not. Those people are not going to be as skilled or knowledgeable as an architect or a construction manager or a surveyor who's been through 4 or 5 years professional education. And then all we're doing with them, with the courses that we're providing with those people, is adding to their knowledge and helping them to apply it in an environment, a context that they're less familiar with.
Yeah.
So of course those people are better, and if money were no object, everyone would want one. But it is. So
is it an in-demand trade at the moment, the retrofit designer?
Well, there's far too few. I mean, it's pleasing. Whenever we do the Retrofit Academy Awards, we always get, we've doubled the number of entries every year I think we'd run it. And a new set of organisations and people put themselves forward, and that's always really good.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's not the same old.
There are the same old, and many of whom are very, very good. But there's always new firms being set up. In this professional services space in particular, there's quite a lot of new firms that are set up. People who've left a bigger practice and set up on their own. So I think there's a really good grouping of people. It's not diverse enough. That's definitely an issue. We're not bringing enough people who aren't white middle-aged male into the sector yet. That's definitely something that we need to do more about. But
that's always been the challenge in construction generally, is the diversity, for sure. But particularly in retrofit, I think it's uniquely suited to diversity because this is people's homes. It's a very odd blend of service / construction retrofit that would suit broader diversity, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So if you put me on the spot and ask me to name my top 5 retrofit coordinators, which I'm not going to do, but I could tell,
especially coming out to an awards.
Yeah, it would be at least 2 or 3 women in that, and that as a proportion of, I think we trained about 3,000 retrofit coordinators. I don't know the exact numbers, but that is not in proportion to. So that tells you. Yeah, I think of our last, I think 2 of our last 3 retrofit coordinators in the year have also been from the fairer sex.
Yeah,
which may tell you some.
Well, I mean, I was only thinking about this the other day, that when you think about our sector broadly, and actually I'm not talking about ventilation here, I'm talking about the built environment more broadly, both scientific, academic and construction related, there are unbelievable standout women in that sector that you would put on an equal, if not higher, than a lot of the men in the sector. So there's no excuse for it. I mean, that it clearly suits a diverse grouping without any question. Because I'm as likely to name a woman as I am a man for a standout person in any one of the areas. We're really lucky, I think, in that sector, and people I really look up to across the board. Yet at scale, it's not there, is it? Which is well, and I know that's a difficult problem.
Yeah, funny enough, one of the working groups we set up with this new association, ARC, it's called Association of Retrofit Consultants, ARC, is to look at that issue, diversity in the professions, and because when we convened ARC and we pulled together all the companies that wanted to be part of it, we looked around and there wasn't a single woman in it, and that's just because they're the people who are running those companies. And there's quite complicated reasons why, there's the barriers, aren't there, to success in life. And sometimes just being female, unfortunately, in the society in which we live, is enough, because you often stop and have kids, and your confidence can sometimes be knocked. I've seen that firsthand. I don't mean to generalise. I've seen that happen with a number of people. Whereas the man charges on and tends to be the entrepreneur, hunter-gatherer type. There's a bit of that culturally. But there's no question about it in terms of competence and suitability, particularly for retrofit coordination and design.
Yeah.
There's amazing women who, we just need more.
Yeah. To break through that glass ceiling. And I know I've had many conversations over the years, as you have, of women in the sector facing blatant misogyny in meetings and just shithousery, which is not great.
But one other perspective on that, okay? So there were recently a list of retrofit coordinators who'd been struck off by Trustmark, and the list of installers had been struck off. And we looked into our database, found out who we knew from those businesses and who had been struck off. Not one of them's female. Now, again, I don't want to, draw too many conclusions from that, but if we're, there may well be something in the, would a woman walk away and leave people in that situation? Based on that limited amount of evidence, all I've got to go on at the minute, no, they wouldn't.
Yeah. And I think that professional element to it can't be underestimated. And we see this in ventilation all the time. I was developing a retrofit practitioner type course over in Ireland recently, and we had the first dry run, and we were doing the usual show of horrors of images of how not to do it. And, there was just that sense of somebody walked away from that thinking, my job's done. And you can't buy that. How somebody can walk away from jobs half done thinking that's okay. That's a hard one to engineer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The reality is it's probably because their boss tells them they have to.
Yeah.
In the majority of cases. But that's where, with that retrofit coordinator role, we drill it into them. And there's no one can say we don't teach them this, because it's rammed down their throat. They are there to protect the interests of the customer. So they have to be in a position to stand up to that boss who's saying, whatever, go on to the next one. They have to, and that's their job. It's their professional responsibility. They're professionally accountable. And that's why it's wrong, in my book, that there's way too many people who clearly lack the skills and experience, who have been trained up by some, frankly, very shady organisations. And it's all very reductionist, and that's clearly not the direction we need to go in.
And what makes the Retrofit Academy different? If I was to ask you to describe the Retrofit Academy to someone who's never heard of it before, how would you describe what you do today?
We train retrofitters to the highest standard we possibly can. And then we provide them with a lifelong learning journey. And I mentioned that earlier. Can't just do a course and then go off and do. We're figuring it out as we go. Yeah. So, we have, I think now, a very good set of foundation level courses. But as I say, as practice emerges and all this additional, the huge reservoir of knowledge that gets built up, because that needs to continue to be fed in. So we've set up a mechanism to do that for a professional membership, so that people, through the events that we organise, the clubs, the forums, the guidance that we write, the community website that we build, all that sort of stuff, they can access that sort of that learning, so that they won't make the same mistakes that other people have in the past.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think it speaks to something you said earlier about that. Do we really think a 2-day course and a set of PowerPoint presentations and a PDF you take home with you is going to cut it in 2025? It's just not the way we access information and learn anymore, is it?
No, it's not. But, there are a lot of companies out there at the minute who aren't quite prepared, and the regulators allow it, to train someone to be a DEA in 3 days and 2 days later to be a retrofit assessor. It is absolute, can I swear now? Well, it's bollocks, isn't it? Yeah. And loads of those people, it's not the individual's fault. They're told it's okay. They might be looking for the cheapest option. I understand that. But, how we're meant to provide competent people after 5 days training to do anything, I don't know. So,
and competency, I think I struggle with the word competency. And we have this in Ireland as well, where I've been developing some stuff. And it makes me uneasy, competency, because we're not teaching competency, I don't think. We're teaching people the skills to navigate a complex world, a complex environment. You don't come out of anything competent. You come out with the skills to manage risk and assess your environment in a way that you get good outcomes, and to know who to ask and how to access the right information when you do. And it was that lovely thing around that as designed theoretical and as built in service kind of idea, that if you're a new build, it's a different game, because you'll have 38 type A buildings on a construction site and 52 type Bs, and it's a rinse and repeat. So you become competent at one process, and you can very well just rattle that out for hundreds and hundreds of properties. It's a completely different environment, and there's no expectations, there's no context, and there's no expectations. You're not dealing with someone's home. But in the world of retrofit, no matter how much you train people, within a week, they're going to be facing a situation where they don't have the tools currently to navigate that. And they need to know, they need to have some processes and some structure to reach into, isn't it?
Backup.
Yeah, that's a backup.
Yeah. So that's why we call it this lifelong. It's not just learning, it's lifelong support. There's way too much money for old rope in our sector. And what I mean by that is pay your accreditation fee, because that gets you Trustmark accredited. Well, that's not the point. The point of paying those fees is to get should be to get the right ongoing support that you need, the software that you need to help you do the job properly, and the access to the technical backup that everyone's, because actually it's not just different from that new build example. It's as different as it can be. The reality is that individual stood in front of that problem is probably the first person who's ever faced that particular problem to some degree. Yeah. Because every house is different and every climate is different. And, that's Russell about that one. So, that we can't leave these people unsupported and out on a limb on their own. And unfortunately, over the last 5 to 6 years, that is exactly what I think has happened.
Yeah.
Money for old rope. Right. Great. Yeah. So we need a far more professional approach. We need, effectively, these are new professions. We started acting far more like a professional body, if I'm honest, than we ever thought we would do. And we've got these tiered memberships which give people a pathway through those professions and to move between them just as you would as an architect or construction manager, there is a combination of experience and evidence that you need to build up to say that,
And a phenomenal amount of resources, it should be said as well, for people that haven't accessed the Retrofit Academy website and the information and the libraries of stuff that's there. There's some phenomenal knowledge.
There is a lot
buried in there. Yeah.
Oh, we've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
We built up a few things, and we employ 5 people full time whose job it is to create, author and produce that content. So, we are, but again, I learned, unfortunately, the realities from my business are we compete against others who don't do any of that. There's some absolute horror stories around training. And it's not just like they say, ventilation and retrofit, it's not especially well regulated, neither is that. So a lot of murky, and we always talk, and if you come to the awards tomorrow, you'll hear me talk more about it. We always talk about worrying about the race to the top, accepting there's always going to be a race to the bottom. That's the battle we've got to win. It's not really about my business being more successful than someone else's. It's do we want to do retrofit this way, properly, well, long-term thinking, long-term investment, or do we want to do it this way, measures-based, silos, people not understanding what they're doing, people not working well together, no coordinator signing off for us. We've got to make a choice. I'll leave you with that thought, because time for tea. You got to make a choice, and you got to make it now. Do you want to go that way? Or do you want to go that?
Yeah. And there's always those forks in the road in business, and it's what gets you up on a Monday morning, is that ability to, stand over what you do. So this week we're recording this during Future Build, which you've been involved in for many years now, curating the retrofit area. I think
the conference.
Yeah, it came. Yeah. How long have you been doing that now?
We started it in 2019, I think, and it was a seminar, barely call it a theatre, again, about 20 seats, or so or other.
Oh, you know what? I remember.
Yeah.
I was in a hotel room, the other side of the Excel there, and I took a beautiful picture of the sun going down at the end of 2019 over the Excel. And a week later, it became the National Hospital for the COVID thing.
You're a year later.
Was that a year later?
We started in 2019. 2020 was COVID. And
COVID.
It was the first, it was the last show that ran before
That's right.
got locked down. And
So you did it was the year before that you did the first one?
First did it.
Okay.
It's sort of scale. A couple of years ago, we decided it wasn't a zone of a show anymore. It was a show in its own right. So called it the National Retrofit Conference. And last year, most of the 200-seat conference area was packed throughout, and I think this week will probably be much the same. So it keeps growing, and we're very. It's the only conference really where we keep the focus on quality and scale. Yeah, there's no point doing one without the other. No point doing amazing retrofit to too few houses. And we've got to have both. So that's what this is all about.
And just to round this off, talking to another sector that's perhaps facing a similar journey to the one Retrofit has had to gone on developing skills, understanding the framework, building the Let's Go, generating true value.
Yeah.
If you were rewriting your journey or advising somebody on a journey from back then, what advice would you give? Where do you put the effort in when it comes to training the skills and developing?
So that's a really good question. So let me try and answer it diplomatically but honestly. Right? We've trained 8,000 people. Okay, there are things I wish we'd have done differently. There's always things you want to change about that. But we trained 8,000 people because we've taken the risk, we've taken the initiative, we've disrupted. Right? It has got next to nothing to do with organizations and bodies that you may, and the general public may think are there to do that, are there to make that kind of thing happen. I get criticized a lot, actually. There are people in our industry who, frankly, go around slagging me off because I think they think I shouldn't have done this, or we shouldn't have done this. We'd have been much better off if we were still sat round in workshops talking about doing this in the future. And there's a whole load of those people generating a whole load of hot air and doing very little about it.
Yeah. So the world is full of talking shops, that's for sure.
Far too many of those.
Yeah.
And we've been down to now. There are times where we can be, maybe we can be a bit of a bull in the china shop, all right? But, we're restless, we're disruptive, we're agitators, we want to get stuff done, and we have got stuff done. So I make no apology to all those people who now, get them then, these people, they're not interested in retrofit until, the money's floating around or the funding's floating around, all of a sudden they're experts in retrofit. So my advice to this ventilation sector would be find a group of people, and it tends to be people, not organizations, who are as passionate about it as you are. And I've got the right ethos and the right sort of, let's make a difference type attitude. Bring those people together, get working collaboratively, not in competition, genuine and collaborating. Find the leader, might be you, son, could be someone else. Find a leader who's going to sit at the heart and take responsibility for making that work and get on with it. And you know what? The government and investors and everyone else will thank you for it, because the last thing, government, we really enjoy working with the officials that we work with. They're great, but they're the first to admit that they're not necessarily the people to provide leadership around the things that we're doing. They're there to administrate and run a government. They're not there to solve the retrofit skills crisis.
Yeah, and I don't know, something like retrofit, maybe you could argue with ventilation, because it could become a trade and you could learn it through college like you would as an electrician or a plumber, notwithstanding all the challenges those sectors have as well, but perhaps a slightly different beast in some way. But definitely with retrofit, you can see it. Retrofit training was never going to happen out of academia. Like who's going to take it on?
They tried. Some people have tried.
Have they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Was there college courses you could go on at some point? Yeah,
there still are. We partnered with about a dozen colleges around the country who want to do what we do, and we've helped them to do it, but they've had very little success accessing a market and serving a market. So we can give them the best courses, what have you, but culturally, that's a very difficult sector.
Yeah, and I'm involved in a few higher diplomas in Ireland on retrofit for energy and things like that. And there's a lot of, perhaps, I don't know how to put it politely, lots of administration in education that slows it down.
Perhaps it's very slow.
Whereas you can be nimble and out the gates and innovate and so on. Do you think, how do you think training might change over the next few years? Will you see more video content, more shorter form stuff, different AI starting to play a part in accessing knowledge and information? I mean, it's all moving really quickly, isn't it?
Well, technology is, sector isn't. I mean, again, that's our, without giving our business strategy away in too much detail to how many competitors there, that's exactly what we're looking to do. We when COVID happened, everything had to go online. We saw that as a scary place at the time, but we saw it as an opportunity, and we figured out quickly how to get good at e-learning. And then we worked out that e-learning, just needing people to it, isn't effective enough. So we developed a new approach, which we call supported online learning, which is where they're doing a lot of learning online, but they're spending a lot of time in video classrooms, and they're spending a lot of time engaging with people on social platforms and community platforms, which is great. What we're now doing is take energy assessment, carrying out a retrofit assessment, SPAYA type thing. It is clearly necessary to get those people into properties, carrying out surveys under supervision. It's actually a really hard thing to do and a very expensive thing to do. We're working on how you can do that using virtual environments.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that supervision stroke mentoring element that's so important in learning. That's a hard one to cover online, or has been traditionally anyway.
No, I think it lends itself. I think it completely lends itself to it. So
Really? What way?
I can connect any retrofitter in the country with one of 5 subject matter experts within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And how could I do that if everything was in a classroom?
Yeah.
How can I can, it's one of our simplest. How can I guarantee whatever your question is, within 2 days, you will get an answer to it if you don't use technology to enable that?
And that's part of the environment that you've created within the Retrofit Academy, that you've got that group of people. Yeah.
Oh, we sort it. You can. People can. We get attacked again as e-learning providers, as if it's a negative thing. It's the only possible way of doing what we're doing.
At scale.
What needs to happen. You just need to do it well. And, whereas CRC, our focus isn't making huge profits. Our focus is the mission, which is training 50,000 competent retrofitters by 2030. That's what it's all about. No point getting to the volume unless they know what they're doing, and they won't know what they're doing unless you provide them with that lifelong support.
And do you think an association is a fundamental part of that structure?
Because that's where the good practice comes together. So the firms that are out there figuring out, using software or, different, are all on different platforms. We're doing things in a slightly different way, or it's design or coordination or assessment, coming together. They're all facing common challenges. They're all trying things out. And that's what the association could form for. It's not lobbying particularly, it's practice.
Yeah, it's not a representative association in the sense that it's just there to lobby and respond to consultations.
It will do that. Of course, that's not why it exists. Yeah, it exists to forge good practice, to share good practice, and crucially, to make those services affordable, the point we were talking about earlier, because there's no point having good practice that no one can afford. So,
Brilliant.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, can I ask a favour? If you enjoyed the podcast and know someone else who might be interested, do spread the word and let's keep building this community. And do check out the YouTube channel by the same name and subscribe if you can, as there will be additional content posted here quite regularly. This podcast was brought to you in partnership with ACO, Ultra Protect, Imbiot and Erico, all great companies who share the vision of this podcast. Your support of them helps their support of the show. Do check them out in the links and at airqualitymatters.net. See you next week.